final member of our committee that's going to be representing this cause, representing this initiative, is Kris Eggert, who, while he's not here today, I think it is probably important to mention, we recognize that, seeing this all the way through will likely take some outside and institutional support, and we're proud. And part of why I'm glad to commit Cliff to this, even though he's also a new member of our campaign team, is he does have deep connections in the national gun safety advocacy movement and with institutional organizations. I want to maybe offer, before opening up to questions, and I'm sure this is some of your first question, a few of the sort of mechanics of this. So to actually get this to the ballot, and I know many of you have sort of followed previous initiatives, previous constitutional amendments. One, you have to form a committee. We've got our committee. The next step will be the submission of our amendment language, which I believe you should all have in your possession now, to the Attorney General with 1,000 signatures from Ohio voters around the state. Our goal is to do that by probably around early March, so that we have more than enough time to then get that language approved, passed over, and certified by the Secretary of State's office, so that we can move on to the broader signature collection gathering process, which is a little bit over 300,000 signatures due by July 6th. So our most immediate sort of looming goal will be those 1,000 signatures submitted to the Attorney General's office. With all that being said, happy to answer questions from anybody and group.
PG, if it's going to take you until March to get 1,000 signatures, why would you think you're going to get 325,000 or whatever before beginning of July?
Sure, because, well, as I said, I think, and there have been conversations. Our group has ties, relationships, connections with national players, and I think so much of people's frustration is the de facto response to doing something about the epidemic of gun violence in our country from Congress is nothing. I would argue that Ohio's own state legislature, their response has been to either do nothing or actually make things worse. So there are a lot of people for whom I think looking at our path to implementing common sense gun safety, this is how it should be done. This is the sort of most direct route to doing it. So I think you'll see more interest from other folks. But as I said, it was very clear, the 5 of us aren't going to be collecting 300,000 signatures. But I will say, I do think we'll be able to build. A substantial volunteer army, and just even in initial conversations, that's already been reflected. But there will be a paid effort toward getting it on the ballot by July 6th.
Do you have a commitment from some outside organization to give you money?
Conversations are being initiated. I think, look, one thing I will say is part of the onus on us is to set this in motion, which is what we're doing here today.
Did this come about as a result of your earlier statements on guns and making it the center of your campaign? Did a national group come to you?
Well, look, I say with great humility as people like, Toby have been doing this for 20 years, and the personal impact that Carol has been, advocating, and everything that Kris has been doing. So, I will say for me personally, I have made this a central issue of my candidacy. I do think the overwhelming sentiment amongst Ohioans, amongst Americans, amongst people of all political persuasions is enough when it comes to gun violence, when it comes to the rising tide of mass shootings. So, look, I think part of the way you also solve this is by having more United States senators that would vote the way that I would vote. But, that's, even adding one PG Sittenfeld to the Senate might not get us there immediately. So, I want to address this issue as directly and immediately as we can, and it's become my observation that this is probably going to be the best path to doing so. Getting to know wonderful people like those standing next to me today, I think there's a broader appetite to do this. So yeah, that's sort of where the idea came from. But so much of this, the seeds of this work have been going on for a very long time.
What you're talking about here is home rule.
Exactly.
And the Ohio Supreme Court in different cases has ruled that home rule is not applicable in the state of Ohio. What makes you think that this is constitutional?
Well, one, we've got some good lawyers, including the people that drafted this language. So I defer to them. But
it would be a constitutional amendment.
Yeah,
that's why it would be constitutional.
Would it apply to other things then? Could they go back and apply home rule to other issues that have gone before the court?
So our language is specifically around gun safety legislation. And again, you can see that in the release that's been distributed. So that's our focus in this case. But yeah, as Dale said, yeah, this is to change the Constitution. And frankly, restore what was already there and what was taken away by what I believe is a state legislature that's out of touch, especially out of touch when it comes to addressing gun violence.
What kinds of things could a city do to fall under this constitutional amendment that would not violate the Second Amendment?
Yeah, so a couple different examples, and I don't know if this is in what we distributed, but we are sure that all of this is consistent with that 2008 Supreme Court Heller case, which means that things like I'm about to mention are all constitutional if this amendment were to go forward. So an assault weapons ban, Columbus had one, Cleveland had one, and the state ended up implementing preemption, which took it away. Saying no firearms in public parks in places like Toledo, which had them. Saying in a place, I would love to say, as a current Cincinnati City Council member, despite what the state might say, no, you cannot bring a gun into a daycare center. So those are things like that. But I think the bigger point, and your question I think sort of got at this too, is we trust local communities, right? We're not trying to do what the state did and deny access to legislation that could, we believe, improve the public good. It'll be for them to decide. And certainly some communities will decide they don't want to do anything. I believe a lot of communities, especially your major urban centers, will be very glad to have this power and autonomy restored to them. So those are a few examples.
So don't you see the confusion if you're someone who is pro-gun, and they go from one city to the other, suddenly they're legal and they're not legal, they're legal, they're not legal, they're going through the state. There's no uniform, so they become illegal and legal. Do you see that as a conflict in creating home rule, where there's no consistency, and when someone's driving across the state, they could be legal in one county or one city, and then all of a sudden become illegal in another?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, this is sort of going back to a right that cities already had. Obviously, we leave it up to local communities to, design the legislation as long as it's, again, compatible with the Ohio Constitution and the United States Constitution, and deal with the implementation, including informing their own electorate. I think one of the things that I would continue to articulate, and I know my colleagues would say the same thing, is, doing nothing should not be ever an acceptable response, and that too often has been the response. And look, might somebody buy, if there's a neighboring jurisdiction where somebody goes and buys a military-style assault weapon, perhaps they can legally do that, but then they can't in Cincinnati. The cities will do everything they can, as they do with all laws, to make their laws known, and it's also incumbent on the citizens to know what the laws are in that particular jurisdiction. So I don't see that as a barrier, and I just think the bigger thing is, not being able to sort of do everything everywhere doesn't mean that doing nothing is an acceptable response to what I believe is an epidemic.
If you are not the party's nominee in March, will you carry this forward, and will it make you more active, take a more active role in it if you are not the party's nominee?
Yeah, so I do want to be crystal clear about this. When I'm a United States Senator, I'm going to be a strong advocate for getting this on, whether I'm on the ballot with it in the fall of 2016, or whether signature process pushes this back to 2017 or 2018. Whether I prevail in March or not, I'm absolutely 100% committed to doing everything I can to advance this. I think, and that's part of what I want to emphasize. This issue is much bigger than me or my campaign, so I want to do whatever I can to be useful.